Chapter 7. The Hike. Al's woke in a fog from a night filled with muddled memories of his mother. Why they were surfacing now and not when he initially interacted with the inherited crystal was a mystery to him. Perhaps he could ask Rez if she had an idea, but he reluctantly remembered leaving abruptly the day before from the cantina, not even bothering to say goodbye to her. He'd have to repair the social faux pas before asking for help. So he spent his first morning in a new but strangely familiar house, trying to see things for the first time, but largely failing. At least it was easy to find the equipment to make coffee, utterly stale coffee, but caffeine didn't expire as far as he knew, so he stomached it anyway. Besides, he hadn't anticipated the thinner atmosphere and lighter gravity, so he probably would have ruined fresh coffee as well. The warmth of the drink was the best part of it, slowly easing into his muscles and separating them from the fitful evening. The house was fairly Spartan in decoration, apart from the study, that is. Most of the furniture was built into the same material that had made up the walls and ceiling. They appeared to be somewhere between carved and polished or vacuum-formed into every surface, though the decor could have just been printed all together with the rest of the construction. However, the Manisae builders had constructed it. He imagined that it made cleaning easier, not having to get under anything. As he wandered around the space in the grounds, the most unsettling feeling was that of near familiarity, like he had visited it once and spent a meaningful amount of time there, and then had half forgotten it. He was careful to take note of all of his senses, and every time he lifted something to smell it, or opened a window and caught a whiff of air, he expected to be transported back to his childhood home. He expected to relive the smells of his parents as he remembered them, not to be greeted with the familiarity of a home that felt like he had lived there for decades. He gave up after a while and decided to fill a canteen with water and strike out into the hills for a few hours. He grabbed a small shoulder bag that he had found in the corner of the study. It looked as if it had seen its share of walking trips, and his decision to take it seemed second nature. His own memories of his father, from before he was stationed here, were of walking the hills and forests surrounding Wien. The lush green and wet hummus underfoot was one of the only memories that he retained of being with his father. Perhaps he could reconnect on another level by creating a matching memory of his own to the ones he inherited by walking the hills of his father's adopted home. For hours, owls roamed the turquoise fields and bare rocks of the terrace landscape. The nearly monotonous color of the introduced flora didn't offer much botanical variety, but he kept his eyes directed to the near ground as he walked, looking for the unexpected bloom out of habit, if anything. Only occasionally would he lift his face to enjoy the view over the young capital and to stretch his neck. Nothing triggered further memories on his hike, perhaps because the activity was something that both he and his father thoroughly enjoyed separately. Leaving it in person and reliving it in his grafted memory held no distinction in his mind. From time to time, though, he would inhale a breath of warm, dusty air with hints of something sweet, which did trigger images of live oak and manzanita. But Alice had never hiked in Chaparral. Wien was much too cold in the winter for that environment. These memories looked more like southern France or Croatia, but he hadn't explored too much there either. The brief memory hinted at him not being alone either, which was quite the opposite of how he preferred to hike normally. Eventually, he found that he could not see the city anymore, which normally wasn't that strange. It was a smaller city by Earth standards. The landscape wasn't so dramatic as to hide even a small city from much searching, though, so he looked for a good vantage point to find his bearings, making his way to the top of the nearest rise. Alice soon found that he could not pinpoint the direction of the city, nor the direction he had followed to arrive where he now found himself. He found that he had probably miscalculated the rate of the sun's approach to the nearest horizon as well, and began to find the air colder than he was comfortable with. He cinched his jacket to the topmost button and shoved his hands in the side pockets to conserve heat. He would have to find some sort of shelter to suffer the night here, or he'd be in trouble. According to Rez, the Manisae hadn't introduced any fauna larger than small reptile analogues. Larger creatures to fill out the food chain was one of the later stages of ecopoiesis, and the Manisae hadn't quite reached it yet. So he wasn't concerned. The search for a reasonable shelter found him following the low hill line into a gradually deepening valley. The atmosphere was still thin enough to not drop too much in temperature the lower one went, and he felt there was a better chance of finding a cozy spot to contain the heat he brought with him, partially surrounded by walls. The dimming light made the search more urgent the further into the hills he walked, but eventually he found what he was looking for. Having no forests meant no combustible wood for a fire, and only bare rock for comfort. Thankfully, Alz wasn't generally one to go anywhere underprepared. Even a short walk could, and did, occasionally find him in unexpected situations back in the Carpathians. The small bag that he had slung over his shoulder on his way out of the house contained a small container with a hard protein and fat gel along with a thin folded space blanket that would block most of his body heat from escaping. He chuckled at the irony of using a space blanket in space as he choked down the flavorless cubes, but posthumously thanked his father for his preparedness. The exhaustion from the hike and cold helped Al's sleep, despite the less than ergonomic accommodation. The blanket did help contain the heat, though not on his face, and it was a noisy contraption. The result was that his sleep was light enough to not let him fall into dreams in a repeat of the previous night. Waking in a cold sweat in a cold environment was not a recipe for continued health. And so the night proceeded thus, Al's stirring every so often due to the noise of the blanket or a stray rock making itself known to his lumbar.